everyone, we are in the final week of my Redecorate a Room series. We have been redecorating my daughter Ashlyn's room together and it has been so much fun, and our final project is this Be the Good banner. I am so excited to make this banner with you guys. It just came together so quick and so simple, and I think you're really going to enjoy making it. So let me show you what you need. First up, you are going to need whatever background fabric you choose. I went with some Kona black. I also used that same cream linen that I used on another project previously for this series to do the letters and the little top hanging sleeve. So I have that. You will also need some fusible web so that you can trace your letters onto that, as well as some fusible interfacing and some fusible fleece. So you're going to want to have all of those handy, and let's get started with making this. So in the pattern you will have the reversed letters that you need for this banner, and then we will take our fusible web and just lay this over here, and a pen or pencil. And then we're just going to trace these. One little tip that I do have is if you have any straight sides, just use a ruler to make your life easier. So I go through and I find all my straight edges first, and I just trace those, and then I go back and freehand all of the curves. So then we can go back like so. And I will just keep tracing until I have all of my letters transferred onto the fusible web. So then once I have that done, I will press all of these onto the back side of whatever you decide to use for your letters. Like I mentioned, I use this beautiful cream linen, and so you can see this is what it looks like when they're all pressed onto that. And now the next step is to cut them out. To save time, I went ahead and cut them all out just right on the line. So you can see I have all of my letters ready to go. So now we will set these aside for now, and we will prep our banner background. So let's move all of this out of the way. And from your background fabric, you are going to need to cut two pieces that measure 18 by 22. Now I used Kona black for mine, and from their width of fabric, I was able to get both of those pieces out of a ½ yard. Depending on the manufacturer that you go with, you might need 3/4 of a yard of fabric because you'd have to turn your cut. Does that make sense? But either way, I was able to get it out of a ½ yard of Kona. And so you can see I have two pieces stacked up here, both cut at 18 by 22, and I'm going to fold these in half, all stacked up together and along this edge, and I'm going to line it up on my mat just like so. And so then what I'm looking to do is I'm going to measure up 6 inches from this fold side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to lay my ruler from that 6-inch mark to this outer point, and I just want to make sure everything is straight because I'm going to cut this all at once so that my pieces match up. So I have this nice and straight from these outside points to 6 inches up, and we're going to use our rotary cutter and make a cut to create the shape that I used here in this banner. So you can see our banner shape, and now we're just going to set these aside for a moment, and we're going to prep both our fusible interfacing and our fusible fleece. So here I have cut these to 17 by 20. I want them to be a little bit smaller so that they're not in my seams when we get to that point. And so same idea here, I'm lining these up on my mat, but instead of 6 inches, I'm only going to come up 5 this time, and because this is cut shorter, that angle will still work. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the tip to here, cut off that. There we go, the fusible fleece is done, just like so, and same idea with my interfacing. You can see I kind of boogered up this side, but I'm not worried about it because I'm going to cut this bottom chunk off. So I'm just going to line this up again, have the fold down towards me, Make sure it stays as square as possible. Sometimes those little glue bumps work against you. There we go. That looks nice. So I know, again, from this outside corner, up 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and trim, just like so. So now all of our pieces are ready to go, and we are going to fuse these to the back of one of each of our panels. So let me just lay one of these out here so you can see it really well, how this works. So here's my fusible fleece, and then when it's just going to kind of hover, and we'll have somewhere between a 1/2 inch and 3/4 of an inch on all sides so that we won't have this caught in our seams. And you can see that's exactly how we want it to look. So I'm going to take this and I'll press both of these in place and I'll meet you back here. All right, I have fused these down. I have one that has our fusible interfacing and one with the fusible fleece. I like to use the interfacing side to put my letters on, and so now I'll just set this one aside for a moment, and let's talk about laying out our letters. So I'm just gonna line this up on my mat so it's nice and straight, and then I actually like to start with my big good across the bottom. And I measure up about 2 inches from my bottom point. So I just lay my ruler here along this edge and I can see where the peak is inside. And then I come in at least 1.5 inches from this outside edge, because I know I'm going to turn these under when I sew my seams. So then we just line these up. Looks nice and neat. And then you can't forget the little period that comes in. Again, making sure I'm in 1.5 inches, and that works out just about perfect. And then we can come up about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches from the top of this. I just like to use my ruler to keep everything square and nice and neat. And I'm lining everything up along this left-hand side. Then I'm going to come from the top of my T. And there we go. Perfect. So now that I have all of that lined up, I'm going to go ahead and press this down, and I'll meet you back here to finish off the edges. All right, so I moved my pressing mat over here so that you guys could see this really well. I've got everything lined up. I went ahead and peeled off all of our paper backing, and now we can just press these down. So if you're not familiar with fusible applique, you don't want to slide your iron. You want to just press and lift straight up. So press and hold, lift straight up, and just move across until everything is fused. You want a nice hot, dry iron. But we don't want to accidentally flip up the edge of our letters, have it stuck to our iron. That would be a bad day. There we go. And you just kind of check and make sure all of your edges are fused the way that you want. I don't feel any that are lifting. Whoop, just the bottom of that B right there. Needs a little bit more heat. Okay, perfect. Let me put all of this back together and then we will start stitching down these letters. All right, so we have this interfacing behind this. We've fused our letters in place, and so now this is when you will do whatever stitch you decide to hold your letters in place long term. So I ended up just doing a straight stitch on the one behind me. That's what my daughter said she wanted, and I was like, okay, easy enough. But I think a satin stitch or a blanket stitch would be beautiful here. I just have my straight stitch machine with me. So let's just do a straight stitch on one of these letters. And I am just gonna go around this D. Just really close to the edge. And then pivot. think the important thing to remember when you're stitching letters down like this is to really just take your time. For me, I find my patience is probably not up to snuff for applique work, even though I truly do enjoy it, but sometimes my finish isn't as pretty as it could be if I would just slow down and enjoy the process a little bit more. But that's okay, right? As long as we're having fun. There we go. Made it around the outside, so then we'll come back and do the same thing on the inside. Really, it's just the curves that you have to really take your time on. And sometimes you have to stop and rotate that fabric. Just keep your needle down. There we go. All right. So now we have stitched all the way around the outside and the inside. We just want to make sure that we secure these letters in place so that it's washable. We've, after all, this is going in a kid's room, dirty fingers, you want to be able to wash this project. So whatever method you decide, go ahead and stitch all of these. I'm going to skip that so that we can move on to the next step. So I am going to leave this face up, and I'm going to put these right sides together, lining those up. And you could totally use pins here or clips. I think I'll grab my clips just to secure these in place in a few spots because we don't want this shifting. Here we go. I've found it's always worth it to take the time to do this when I think, I wonder if I should. I usually should in that case. Otherwise, I'll end up having to use our handy seam ripper at the end. There we go. Just a few more along this side, and then we can zoom all the way around. All right, that ought to do it. Okay, we move these out of the way. So now I am just going to sew on these two long sides and across the bottom. We're going to leave the top open for now. So let's go ahead and do this. And I do recommend just a little bit wider seam here. You can go up to like a 3/8 inch, just a little bit wider than your standard 1/4 inch. I do want to point out I'm using white thread so you guys can see, but I did switch my thread and use black thread when I was sewing these together. So I am just going to sew straight off this end, just like so, and then I can pivot this and come back and go down this side. Again, I'm using that 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you want to use a 1/4, that's totally fine. Just whatever you're comfortable with. I just don't want it to run the risk of coming out or fraying. Get there and pivot. Okay, and our last side here, getting so close. Okay, so now you can see I've sewn those 2 long edges across the bottom and the top is still open. So that's exactly how we want it. So now let's bring this back over here and we are going to trim off some of the bulk around here and clip our inside so that this will lay nicely. So I'm going to use my scissors here and I'm going to trim off this point. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to shave this down a bit so that I just have less fabric down here at the point, because we want this to turn easily. So I'm just going to take this up a little ways to make sure that that's all going to be out of the way when I go to turn this. Go ahead and do the other side as well. Cut off that tip. There we go. Just shave that down. No real exact amount, just leave it wide enough that you don't want your stitches to come loose. There we go, that looks nice. And then I'm going to use my scissors and I'm going to clip right here on the inside. Again, just be really careful not to go through that stitch line. So I've done one right in the middle and I'm going to do a few more along the side just to make sure that this middle point has plenty of give and that this will lay nicely when I turn it. There we go. So I've just, you can see these little like fringy bits that are in the middle there that will allow this to flex and lay nicely. All right, so now we can reach in. I like to kind of push against that on that side and this side to get me started. And then we can pull this through. Go back and push out the tips here. And I'm going to use the end of my pencil because I have it handy. You can see how by trimming that down, that lays so nicely. Do the same over here. Just like so. Lovely. All right, so let's take this over to the pressing mat and press this down nice and flat. I just want to make sure that all of my seams are laying flat. That they're not tucked under themselves. Sometimes you just have to kind of roll them between your fingers to make sure that they're behaving the way that you want them to. You can see here, this is a good example of why I switched my thread. Can you see this white that's peeking through? Like I said, I wanted you guys to be able to see what I was stitching, but if I had used black, that wouldn't show. So when you're making it at home, make sure you switch your thread out. Here we go, and this final side. Just take your time and get it to lay nice and flat. Isn't that so fun? We are so close to being done. So from this point, you can top stitch along the edge. I'm gonna wait and do that later since I do have white thread on my machine, but you can do that at any point. You could add straight line quilting. You could do all kinds of fun, whatever you want to make this your own at this point, but you could also just leave it exactly as is. This has some great body to it because of the interfacing and the fusible fleece that we added. So now let's talk about making that little hanging sleeve that goes along the top. So in order to do that, we are going to take from our linen fabric a piece that is 3 inches wide, and I recommend you measure what your project ends up. Mine is exactly 17 inches wide, so whatever your width ends up, add an inch to that. So that's what I've cut this. It is 3 inches tall by 18 inches long, and so that is what you're looking for. So to begin, we are going to turn under the 2 short ends 1/4 inch twice, just like that, and then press them. So let's go ahead and do that over here. So I usually just eyeball this. If you want, you can use the little heat-proof rulers that they have out there. But I'm just going to turn it under twice. Oops, kind of caught. And then we'll do the opposite side, exact same thing. And one more. Okay, so now I am going to stitch down these two sides so that we don't have any raw edges that will poke through on these little ends. Flip this around, stitch down the other side. Just like so. And then now I'm also going to press under just one turn along one of the long sides, 1/4 inch. Just like so. Move this down a little bit. There we go. So this is what we're looking for. We have these two finished ends and I've turned under one long side. And so now the side that I have not turned under, we're going to lay this right along the top of our banner. You can see that matches up exactly. Again, if you want to use pins, you can. And we are going to sew this down with a 1/4 inch seam, just all the way across this top edge. And so now we're going to flip this up and give it a good press so it lays nicely. All the way across here. And then I'm going to bring this over to my cutting mat just so you can really get a good look at what I'm talking about here. So you can see we've now enclosed the top with that first line of stitches, but we don't want anybody to see this stitch line. So now I'm going to fold this down just about 1/8 of an inch past that line of stitches. So you can see I'm just flipping that over so I know that it's going to cover. And I'm going to grab some pins here because I want this to be enclosed. And I wanted to make sure you guys can see what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to make my way across, ensuring that we cannot see those stitches. And I'm going to make sure that I'm pinning up out of the way. I'm actually going to move this up a little bit. And a couple more across here. Just like so. Making sure it's all laying nicely. Okay. There we go. So you can see now this is covering that first line of stitches. So you have two options here. You can either sew from this back side so you can see, but you run the risk if you do that of having your stitching be in the black of the front of this banner, which is what I wanted to avoid. So as you can see, I've put my pins way up out of the way, and I'm going to now take this to the machine and I'm going to stitch right, maybe like 1/8 of an inch above my last seam line. So just top stitch right along this edge. And because I've pinned this in place, I know it's going to catch the back side. If this makes you nervous, just stitch from the other side and give yourself a little bit more room so that you're not stitching in the black. But this is how I did mine. So we are going to start here under the needle. You can see my pins are well out of where I'm going to be stitching. So I am gonna back stitch a little bit there. And we are just going to cruise across here. Every once in a while, I just double check, make sure everything is laying smoothly, since we can't see that back side. Like this little one down here, I can tell doesn't want to stay folded under, so I'm going to have to watch that when I get to the point. There we go, opposite end. And we have it all enclosed, and when you flip it over, you can see we caught all of that. Our seam line is not showing, which is exactly what we were going for. So then I just slid this onto a dowel rod. You can see I have this behind me, and then I used some yarn that I picked up from my friends over at One Big Happy, and I just used 3 strands for each section of a braid, and I just braided a hanger. And then Sarah Delaney over there had this great tutorial, which you should go check out, on how to make the tassels. And so then I just tied these tassels onto the braided rope that I made. Super quick and easy and so much fun. And so I hope you enjoyed this last project in our Redecorate a Room series, and I will see you next time on At Home with Misty. Hey everyone, it's Misty. Thanks for watching At Home. If you aren't already a part of our Missouri Star family, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell if you want a notification every time we release a new video. I'll see you next Monday on the newest episode of At Home.